What is Operation Raven?
Operation Raven, RVN, which stands for Reducing Violence in Our Neighborhoods. What Operation Raven is about is putting high visible police personnel, black and white police cars, into these communities that are experiencing the most gun violence. And so this is a combination of our police officers in black and white cars already, bringing on other staff from around the department that might not normally be assigned to a black and white car, but putting them in one and getting them out to these neighborhoods. It's really flooding these neighborhoods with officers from our agency as well as some other agencies. And the goal is for them to just be visible and get out of the car and have interactions, talk to people, get to know what's going on in the neighborhood. It's not to be an occupying force of severe enforcement. Our enforcement is really about being focused on the guys and groups that are doing the violence. And it's about suppressing violent crime in the area through that high visible police presence, hopefully to just stem some violence, especially the retaliatory violence. But it's also to give a sense of safety and security to the neighborhood residents. They want us there in these what we call target areas or focus areas. They want us in the neighborhood. They want to work with us on reducing gun crime. So it's really twofold, which is to be there, stem any violence just from a visible presence, and also give the community some sense of safety and security while we continue to work hard on building intelligence, building criminal cases. Detectives are working hard while we continue to do those other components of our gun violence reduction strategies.
When you're redeploying officers from other parts of Stockton's communities, are those communities more now at risk because they don't have the law enforcement presence that they once did?
So when we're redeploying and doing Operation Raven by putting more personnel in these focus areas, it's true, we are taking resources from other parts of the city. That's the tough decision we have to make in a deployment strategy like that. We still have coverage, so they're still going to get the 911 response from a patrol officer, but it might be some of those other duties, for example, some quality of life issues, graffiti cleanup, maybe some work with some homeless encampments, things like that. We're redeploying and putting into Operation Raven. So it is about moving around resources, and it's not necessarily we're giving up any safety components, but some of those quality of life issues might have a lower priority while we work on this really significant issue that's affecting our communities.
The officers that were already covering these areas, these critical neighborhoods or areas of the city, they've had time to, however long they've been on that beat, they've had a time to get to know the community, get to know people in the community. These officers that are being redeployed to these areas are coming to it with fresh eyes, but there's also some risk there, I would think, putting new officers into these really hot neighborhoods, like you're saying.
Yeah, so we have some officers who have longer term relationships with the community, and then we're bringing in officers who maybe don't know that neighborhood as well. But we expect them to get to know the neighbors in the neighborhood well. So, for example, that officer, maybe from another part of town or maybe from a totally different function in the department previously, we just expect them to get up to speed pretty quickly as to what's going on in that neighborhood, and then get out of that car and interact with the community so you get to know what's going on directly from them. So again, some officers may have been working there for years, know the neighborhood really well. Some might be coming in not knowing all of that, but we expect them, that's community policing, get out of that police car and talk to people at the park, at the market, whatever it is, and get to know. That's how you quickly get to know what's really going on in a neighborhood.
These groups that you keep mentioning, do they have names? Are these certain, gangs that you're talking about? Or are you talking about, groups of people? What can you go a little bit more in depth on what that actually means?
Yeah, so when we're always focusing on group gun violence. In our cases here, they are gangs. So these are street gangs. Some of them have some more organized structure than others. Actually, we've seen the flare up in some gangs here in Stockton that really don't have an organized structure necessarily. Very much young adults or 18 to 20s. So not necessarily part of our traditional or historic gangs that we have, but associated with them. So we've seen a recent flare up of a few different rivalries between some of these gangs, and oftentimes it cascades so quickly and we're not always able to predict exactly what it is that may set off a certain rivalry. So it's a mandate for us as a department to be very nimble, do real-time policing, get on top of these things as much as we can to solve these cases, give the families the justice that they deserve, give the communities the relief that they deserve in the sense of safety and security, and to attempt to change the tide of our group gun violence here in Stockton. And then there's the important prevention and intervention piece also. So we're doing the enforcement side. Part of our strategy is also to leverage through the Office of Violence Prevention and our community partners to really work on the next generations to keep them from picking up guns. What are we doing about prevention and intervention? And those have to be working simultaneously.
With these newer types of groups, these gangs that aren't as organized as, say, historically they have been in Stockton, what are some of the challenges that your detectives and investigators and officers are facing with these types of gangs?
There have been a few dynamics of gangs that have been changing that make it difficult for law enforcement. And these are that they might not necessarily identify with certain colors of clothing. They might not necessarily identify with certain turf, if you will. So there's more travel across the city, different parts of the city, so not necessarily knowing or predicting where a flare-up may occur of actual gun violence. We're also seeing the way they communicate with social media. That's also challenging for law enforcement. So it's incumbent upon us to adapt and to be able to keep up with these changing dynamics. We're also finding that they're young and they don't necessarily always have a criminal record. And so these are just a few examples of sort of the changing gang dynamic. And we're also always checking with our peers. So other cities they're combating gun crime like we are, what are they seeing? And we're actually noticing that a lot of these dynamics that I've mentioned here are also occurring in some of the other cities too.
Is there one city in particular that you're looking to for advice, guidance, trying to model what you're doing here?
A lot, but in particular, so we're scanning, looking across the nation, what's working in your agency, what's working in your city. And so we partner with National Network for Safe Communities, and we also have a contract with California Partnership for Safe Communities. These are researchers and academics who are pointing us to best practices and are actually on contract with us and the Office of Violence Prevention to work on what are the best practices and strategies. And they understand that the group gun violence dynamic is always changing. And so we feel, for example, ceasefire is a very good strategy for the type of gun violence that we're experiencing. Oakland is one example of a city that's been successful, although they've seen their challenges as well. But we work with the Oakland Police Department a lot as far as peer exchange, looking at what they're doing there, and so in a number of other cities as well.
This doesn't seem like it would be a quick fix. So last night we had another homicide here in Stockton. Do you anticipate things getting worse before they get better?
I anticipate we'll continue to have some spikes and valleys, and hoping that we're driving that long-term trend line down. There is no one magic wand to address gun violence. If so, all of the cities across the nation would be using it. There are some promising strategies, but the strategies need to be modified for those individual cities. You can't take a cookie-cutter approach, but you can learn from other cities and maybe apply it here. I feel like we have a very comprehensive plan. Do we need more resources and capacity built into it? Yes. So, for example, ceasefire, which takes a balanced approach of strong enforcement for those who do not heed the warning to stop the gun violence, but is also making strong attempts to get guys out of that dangerous lifestyle because they're equally at risk of being a victim of gunfire or arrested and a suspect based on the activity they're engaged in. So anything we can do, there's a strong component of the community side, which is nonprofits, clergy, mentoring groups, anything to really get these guys out of the lifestyle so we don't have continued shootings or they don't get shot. We have outreach workers, they're called peacekeepers. They're out on the streets working with these guys with intervention, meaning direct intervention of guys that are out on the streets or in the cars in the neighborhoods carrying guns. And so either for what they feel is their own self-protection, or because they're in danger, or because they're just actively involved in crime with guns. So there's no one magic formula, but the formula definitely has police as a component, but we are not the only. What that means is we're looking for shared public safety. Oftentimes when people mention public safety, they just think fire and police or law enforcement. Shared public safety means we all have a role in the community. And again, that's our nonprofits, our community-based organizations, our clergy, and we have a lot of clergy that are going out and doing walks through the neighborhoods, trying to get a few things, trying to get guys from going into this gang lifestyle, but also trying to encourage the community to work with us. We have a very difficult time solving cases when we're not getting information. Almost always somebody knows who did it or has a pretty solid tip. And we're trying to encourage those tips need to come into us, that information needs to come to the police department. So leveraging the community support is critical. And from what I've seen, looking at different cities across the nation, when there's a strategic enforcement piece that's very data-driven, and a willingness and a commitment to acknowledge there's a gun crime problem and dedicating resources to it, caring, but then also having the strong community component, that they're working with us and they're working in these neighborhoods. That most of the formulas that show the most promise have those components.
Many of the victims this year have been teenagers, some very young teenagers. Do you think that's because of the age of the people that are perpetrating the crimes too? And they're going after people that are in their circle of peers, friends? Why are we seeing such a young demographic of victims?
The standard dynamic, if you will, in every case is different. And it's difficult to talk in big generalities like that. We have to, because we have to get a handle on the issue. But any one homicide is too many homicides, and every family is really impacted by the homicide and goes through trauma. But when we look at themes, what is going on with this vast number, typically the age of the victims is about the age of the suspects, and that's because of that dynamic of we've got groups engaged in high-risk activity where they are often at equal risk of being shot or shooting someone. And so we do believe that the general age of the groups that are the most active right now often translates into why we're seeing now younger victims and suspects than we have in some prior years. A
report came out in February of this year saying the city is fiscally healthy, after filing for bankruptcy in 2012. You got some money. Is that money being allocated to assist with this crisis?
So yeah, I have a certain amount of allotted police officers. I have 485 positions of officers, which is the highest amount we've had. Ever. And we've emerged from bankruptcy. However, we still have a long-range financial plan as a city to keep us from getting back into bankruptcy. Now, would I like more officers? Of course. In fact, there was a study that Dr. Anthony Braga did a number of years ago on, how many officers should Stockton have, or any city have, really, per capita, per residence. And that study would essentially today mean we would need about 600 police officers to really make a difference on the type of gang violence that we've seen. And so I don't have those. I have 485. I don't have 600. So it's less on how many officers a department has. It's more on how are you using those officers? Are you deploying them strategically? But because we had so many issues flare up at the same time in different parts of the town, I didn't have enough resources to, I think, flood those neighborhoods with officers that they deserve, and that's one reason why I asked for additional help from some other police departments.
So the help from CHP and Sheriff's Office, those are kind of supplementing your resources at the moment?
That's exactly, yeah. We've got the State Highway Patrol, Sheriff's Office, and it's for a temporary basis, but while we need them, and I feel like I do, they're supplementing the strategies that we currently have going.
You can't have them forever, so are you looking to hire more officers?
Yeah, definitely more officers, more analysts are critical. I do think one component of the long-term plan is this Crime Gun Information Center with the ATF and the U.S. Attorney's Office and other federal agencies. And it's really to look at gun crime at a regional level. So not just Stockton, but also how does Oakland, is there a dynamic link there, or some of the other cities around in our area? Oftentimes those committing gun crime don't necessarily stop at the city line or even know where that city line is, so we have to work with our sheriff's office as well. And it's got a lab component, so we can link better evidence, we can link shootings together. And also part of this long-term approach, the Crime Gun Information Center, is to figure out how are illegal guns getting into Stockton, and who has maybe legal guns but are using them illegally. And it's really looking at why are there so many guns in our community. And so that's, I think, an important piece for us to be looking at as we continue this, combating gun crime. And then other parts of the long-term strategy really come down to the prevention and intervention side as well. So we're often dealing with shootings after they happen. I mean, that's the traditional role of law enforcement. We're trying to get on the front end of that, but really, I think for our community to really have the change it deserves, it's going to be about the prevention side. How do we get youth from getting into gangs in the first place? Very complex social issue, but the more we have joined side by side working on that, from our school districts to our churches to our community groups, even if everybody just mentored someone to help them get on the right path, those are the types of things that are necessary, I think, to eventually really change the trajectory of this community.
The Gun Crime Info Center, when do you anticipate that being in existence, that supporting this community?
We are working on the logistics now to get this Crime Gun Information Center up. We anticipate it'll be a couple months yet. So,
but this year?
This year,
okay.
Yes.